The loneliest moment of my life didn't happen when my wife died or when I retired after 43 years working at the rail yard. It happened at 2:30 in the morning in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, while I stared at the empty chair beside my bed waiting for my son to arrive. My name is Walter Pierce. I'm 72 years old, and until last winter, I believed family loyalty meant something permanent. I had collapsed in my kitchen after a mild stroke. One minute I was making tea. The next I was on the floor, unable to move my left arm properly, while my phone rang somewhere across the counter out of reach. My neighbor found me after noticing newspapers piling outside my door and called an ambulance. The doctors told me later I was lucky. Lucky. Funny word, considering the only person sitting beside me during the first 12 hours in that hospital was a retired neighbor named Frank who wasn't even related to me. My son Brian lived only 30 minutes away. 30 minutes. Yet somehow strangers visited before he did. When a nurse finally reached him by phone, I heard her side of the conversation clearly because hospital rooms are quieter at night than people realize. "Your father asked for you specifically," she said politely. Pause. "Yes, I understand you're busy." Another pause. Then the sentence that changed everything for me. "Sir, he's asking whether you're coming tonight." The nurse looked uncomfortable after hanging up. She adjusted my blanket and quietly said, "He said he'll try tomorrow." Tomorrow. Like visiting his hospitalized father was a dentist appointment that might fit into his schedule if traffic allowed. I spent that entire first night alone, listening to machines beep while nurses rushed strangers down hallways. Every few hours, I checked my phone hoping for a message from Brian, but mostly I saw notifications from online banking and pharmacy reminders. Around 4 in the morning, I stared at the ceiling thinking about all the years I spent protecting that boy from feeling abandoned. His mother left when he was 11, just disappeared one afternoon with another man and never looked back. Brian cried himself sick for months afterward, and I promised him then he'd never face life alone as long as I was alive. I worked overtime constantly to keep our small house. I missed sleep, relationships, vacations, and opportunities because every extra dollar went toward raising him properly. I attended every baseball game, even after 14-hour shifts. I sat through terrible school concerts with genuine pride. When he got accepted into college but couldn't afford tuition, I sold my restored 1967 Mustang, the only luxury item I ever truly loved, so he could graduate debt-free. I still remember handing him the check while he hugged me saying, "Dad, one day I'll repay you for everything." Funny how children mean promises sincerely when life is difficult and forget them slowly once comfort arrives. Brian became successful fast. Corporate law, big salary, luxury condo downtown, designer watches, expensive vacations posted constantly online. At first, he still visited regularly. Then work became crazy. Then weekends became unavailable. Then holidays turned into rushed dinners squeezed between networking events. Every conversation eventually became transactional. He called mostly when he needed advice, money, or help moving something. Still, I defended him whenever neighbors hinted he seemed distant. "He's building a future," I'd say proudly. Parents become experts at explaining away neglect because admitting the truth hurts too much. The next afternoon, Brian finally arrived at the hospital wearing an expensive coat and looking irritated more than concerned. He hugged me awkwardly with one arm while checking messages on his phone using the other hand. The first thing he said wasn't, "How are you feeling?" or "I was worried." It was, "You really scared everybody." Everybody. As though he'd been surrounded by emotional relatives all night instead of arriving nearly 16 hours later. He stayed less than 20 minutes before saying he had an important client dinner he couldn't miss. I asked if he could at least stop by again the following morning before my MRI. He hesitated just long enough to tell the truth without speaking it directly. "I'll try, Dad." There's something deeply humiliating about begging your own child for time. After he left, the nurse named Carla sat beside my bed, checking monitors, and quietly muttered, "You deserve better than that." I defended him automatically out of habit, saying work pressure can be intense. But even while speaking, I realized I sounded like a hostage explaining bruises. Over the next 3 days, Brian visited twice, never longer than 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Frank came every afternoon carrying newspapers and terrible vending machine coffee. Carla adjusted her breaks to sit with me during lonely evenings. Even the janitor stopped to chat some nights because he noticed I rarely had visitors. Strangers gave me more humanity than my own son. Then came the moment that permanently changed my perspective. On the fourth day, I woke unexpectedly from a nap while Brian stood near the window, speaking softly to his wife Melissa on the phone. He didn't realize I was awake. "Look, if his condition gets worse, we need to discuss the house quickly," he whispered. Pause. "No, I'm serious. Assisted living could cost a fortune if he lingers like this." Lingers. My son described my possible death using the same tone people use discussing delayed flights. Then he said the sentence I'll never forget. "Honestly, the inheritance could disappear fast if we're not careful." I stayed perfectly still, pretending to sleep, while something cold settled inside my chest, heavier than the stroke itself. Suddenly, every rushed visit, every distracted conversation, every glance at his watch made sense. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about losing assets. That night after Brian left, I asked Carla to help me contact my attorney first thing the next morning. 3 days later, while still recovering in the hospital, I signed a completely rewritten will. Before the stroke, Brian inherited nearly everything: my house, savings, investments, and insurance policies. After the rewrite, things looked very different. I established a scholarship fund for children of railroad workers. I donated substantial amounts to the hospital foundation and local veteran center. Frank received my Mustang restoration tools and a financial gift larger than anything Brian ever expected him to see. Carla received enough money to pay off her nursing school loans because she showed more compassion in 1 week than my son showed all year. And Brian? I left him exactly $1 along with a handwritten letter explaining why. The attorney asked twice whether I was certain because changes that dramatic often trigger legal disputes. I told him absolute certainty is a rare gift old age eventually provides. When I finally returned home after rehabilitation, Brian suddenly became extremely attentive. He visited more often, brought groceries, even offered to help organize medications. But once you hear the truth in someone's unguarded voice, performance becomes impossible to ignore. Every kindness felt calculated afterward. One evening during dinner, he casually asked whether I'd updated paperwork recently after the hospitalization. I looked directly at him and said yes. His eyes sharpened immediately, though he tried hiding it. Then he asked whether everything was still straightforward. Straightforward. Another word people use when discussing money they believe already belongs to them. I simply nodded and changed the subject. Months passed. Physically, I improved, but emotionally something fundamental shifted. I stopped pretending crumbs were loyalty. I stopped excusing neglect as busyness. Most importantly, I stopped confusing biological connection with character. Then last spring, I invited Brian and Melissa to dinner. My attorney attended too. The moment Brian saw legal folders on the table, his entire demeanor changed. Tense, alert, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. I calmly explained that my hospitalization forced me to reevaluate many things, including what legacy actually means. Brian smiled nervously and said, "Dad, you know I'd never care about money over family." The lie landed between us so heavily, even Melissa looked uncomfortable. Then my attorney handed him the updated will. I watched my son's face carefully while he flipped through pages, expecting confirmation of ownership. At first he looked confused, then pale, then genuinely panicked. "What is this?" he whispered. He reread sections repeatedly like words might rearrange themselves into a better outcome if he stared hard enough. Finally, he reached the final page and saw the $1 inheritance. His hands literally started shaking. "You're joking," he said quietly. I told him I wasn't. He looked at me like a stranger. "You gave money to nurses? To charities? To Frank?" The disgust in his voice revealed more than he realized. Not sadness about losing me someday. Outrage about losing access. I answered calmly. "I gave it to people who showed up when I was lying in a hospital wondering whether my own